From New Jersey, this is Low Fidelity. I'm Jeff Heller.
And I'm Mike LeBrie. On this episode, we will be discussing the role artists play in politics.
If you want to support Low Fidelity, rate and review us on iTunes, subscribe to us on Reddit and YouTube, and follow us on Twitter with the handle Lo-Fi Podcast.
All the links you need are in the description, but please, if you have any feedback for us, feel free to leave it in the comments on the episode or send us an old-fashioned email. We'll read it. feedback@lowfidelity.info.
So this episode, we are going to have a lengthy discussion, well, hopefully lengthy, on the role of artists in politics and the many different forms that may take.
Let's also reiterate that we're kind of doing two parts of the podcast in the reboot here. So this is going to be the first part of the discussion. The second part, which will be out later the same month, is going to be our album review. Jeff, what's the connection between the topic and the album review this month?
Our album review of John Prine's self-titled debut album has some political content on it. Can't say it's completely that way. It's not all protest music or that sort of thing. However, there are, in his efforts to be more empathetic with those around him, politics do play a role. And so he isn't sharing necessarily his personal beliefs, or he could, we don't really know, but those views do exist on the album. And therefore, what a great time to bring up this topic, especially in such a heated political environment that we are currently in the year 2017.
Sure, and not to spoil some of the stuff that I saw in your notes. See, you share your notes with me. I don't share my notes with you, so I get a little bit of spoiler territory here. I see where you're kind of going with that, and I definitely see the connection, and I hope we can make that connection for people.
Another disclaimer, I think we'll probably have a disclaimer at the beginning of every episode at this point. We really do want to give more of an objective view to the different areas of artists in politics.
You say objective. I hate that word. I don't think that's a real word. Obviously, I know it's a real word, but everyone brings their own preconceptions, their experience, their life experience to everything. There is no way to truly enter anything 100% objective. I think that's, but we're not going to go overboard with our political opinions at times, but I think some of the questions that will be raised will get some of that out of us. And I also want to address the keep your politics out of it. I mean, this is what we're going to be talking about this episode is there a place for politics in music? There's a place for politics in everything. And I don't necessarily, I'm bringing my own politics into it here. I don't agree with there's no safe space where you can't talk about politics. I think it kind of always has to be out in the open. And when it comes to artists and especially music, it's all connected. To say there's no politics in music, it's gonna be there, and deal with it. I don't know.
You balance me out like perfectly. I think that disclaimer goes out fine. You do with this information what you will, but I think the main point of what we're doing here is bringing up some notable examples of the different ways in which artists get involved with politics. Let's just get into some examples. And there's different avenues that we're going to look at this from. And one of them is just kind of going over different types of protest music that we've had over the years. The most notable examples kind of start with the folk and civil rights movement. But a lot of the music that comes in from that particular movement is stuff that originated from gospel. When we're looking at the early 1900s, going into the 1960s, you're seeing a lot of these traditional forms of music turning into protest music in the 60s. A good example of one of these songs that comes from traditional roots is the song We Shall Overcome. When I was looking at the history of the song, it took me back to Reverend Charles Albert Tinley from Philadelphia back in around 1900s. And this is a gospel song, I'll Overcome Someday.
I'll overcome someday.
So at some point, this goes to a guy whose name is Guy Carawan, and he would popularize the song within the civil rights movement of the 1960s, basically because he would teach it to students who would then get heavily involved in the movement. So it's really him and his teachings that kind of made it go into this larger audience. That's just one example. When we look at other examples, such as This Land Is Your Land, Woody Guthrie in there, Blown in the Wind from Bob Dylan. Now, we kind of have to ask the question as we go through this, does music actually change anything? Is it actually effective in making policy change? And I don't necessarily think you can legitimately answer that question by citing, yes, in HR 506, this clause changed because this song said it should be something else. Like that seems way too specific, and you're not going to find any examples of that. Or if they are there,
it would just be one contributing factor to a larger social movement.
Right.
And that's very different from a lot of the stories you hear, the personal stories where it's this song saved my life. This song got me through a hard time. Obviously, music can very very directly on a one-to-one basis do that, making that claim of changed a law, that's a little more difficult. That's got to be part of something else.
Right. It's a motivation, but it's not a specific, this law changed because this song said to do this.
Sure.
I mean, that you're not going to find that, I don't think. Now, granted, let's not overlook the fact that, this rock pop sound that formulates in the 50s gets into its maturity age in the 1960s. Apart from folk music becoming these civil rights anthems, you have songs like For What It's Worth by Buffalo Springfield, one of the greatest examples of a politically charged song with no real specifics as to what it's about. Even today, there's a bit of a disagreement as to whether it's about the closing of a club, which is what Stephen Stills specifically says it's about, versus, it's just about political unrest in general.
Well, that's the great thing about a great song is that it can apply and transcend time. You release that song now, and it's just as appropriate as it always was.
I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Let's take a look at something very, very subjective, though, in contrast to that, which is Crosby, Stills, and Nash & Young's Ohio. This is a very specific case about the Kent State shootings where the National Guard killed 4 college students who had no weapons on them, basically. This egregious event that happened in American history.
Twin soldiers and Nixon coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. 4 dead in Ohio.
Here is Neil Young, in this case, writing a song regarding this event. Neil Young himself even said that it's ironic that he capitalized on the death of these American students.
Right. You feel bad about it in a way. I have to imagine there's got to be a lot of inner conflict when you come up with a popular song that you make money off of that capitalizes on death. That's going to be tough.
I appreciate Neil Young for recognizing that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, it's that inner duality where do you risk commercializing something legitimate, but doing that does bring it to a wider audience.
It does, for sure. So, I don't envy that position at all.
But we see that duality a lot in popular music. I mean, because that's the whole point of pop music, right? Is to be popular, to reach a wide audience.
Mainstream audience, for sure.
There were other songs, of course, we should bring up, like Respect from Aretha Franklin, getting into the feminist movement, and Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, going into things about the Vietnam War. Gosh, there were a lot of songs about the Vietnam War in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, but Fortunate Son's another one of those songs that continues to be covered, and you just pluck it out of time, put it in another time, and then it's just as relevant as it was.
Yeah, certainly true. Now, granted, I think a lot of those songs are hard to misinterpret because, especially in Ohio's case, it's very subjective. It says exactly what it's about. When we go to the 1980s and we look at a specific example with Bruce Springsteen here, Born in the USA, that to me is really conflicting. I keep saying the word anthem, but really, what better way to describe the chorus of Born in the USA, right?
I mean, it's just saying the same couple words over and over. So by definition, it's kind of an anthem there.
It is, but I mean, such a triumphant melody.
Yeah.
There's very little bass in it. It's just the drums and the high notes with the synth, I think it is. And just Bruce singing over that with such passion. It's very easy to think of it as a patriotic song, especially with that melody. But here comes Ronald Reagan saying, I'm going to use it as my campaign slogan. And, very quickly, Bruce Springsteen shooting that down, saying, no, you're not paying attention to what the lyrics are saying.
I just did a basic Google search just to see what would come up. And yeah, Rolling Stone's got 35 artists who fought politicians over their music. I mean, there's so many articles out there about that. And of course, what do you think they lead with? Bruce Springsteen.
Of course.
Of course they would. Right.
Again, kind of showing a duality. Let's focus on last year because there was a really effective commercial done by the Bernie Sanders campaign, which had the Simon and Garfunkel song America in the background. And the track America, unlike Ohio, it's not really specific in that song. I don't think Counting the Cars on the New Jersey Turnpike say anything about a certain political stance, but it is sort of seen as this overarching view of the state of America at that time. To be brought into a political context, I would see that as being a point of contention between a campaign and an artist. But in this case, it was Garfunkel who said, without question, that Bernie Sanders was allowed to use the song for their commercial.
We're so used to hearing artists say, I never gave permission for that song. You gave permission. Yeah. Why?
I think legally, finally, it comes down to, will you allow this? So they go to Paul and me, and it's the moment that you say, am I a Bernie guy? Yes, I am. You can use it.
Does the purpose of the song, if you read the liner note, does it match the message of that commercial? Or is it that we just love seeing the faces and we love hearing America?
I think we love hearing America. I don't think, so much of news is looking at what happened after the fact and then making a story. But I think I just acquiesced and let Bernie use my song that I'm so proud of, and I don't know if there's a specific thing, except we've come to look for the country and we don't really know who we are.
There's not too many examples of it where we see some actual agreement amongst artists and politicians. Even Neil Young had no issue with Keep on Rockin' in the Free World being used for Bernie Sanders' campaign as well. Yeah. Very different from what we're used to.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to the area that is more up my wheelhouse. That's the punk rock scene. It's right in there constantly, isn't it? Rebellion is built into that scene. So, of course, that's going to be in the forefront.
But I argue that rock and roll kind of had that original rebellion strike to it as well.
Sure.
But granted, I mean, we're looking at punk rock that started in the 70s. At this point, rock is at 20 to 30 years, right?
I mean, you could say the same thing about punk rock today. The bands that people tell me they listen to punk rock, I'm like, excuse me, that's not really punk rock. And now I tell them the bands I listen to, and the people older than me would say that's not really punk rock. So I get it. Yeah, there's a maturity level and a growth of the medium and of the genre. And of course, things change. I don't want to say they get sanitized, but...
Well, they have to evolve if they're to continue. I mean, that's just the nature of art in itself.
Or do they? I don't know.
Well, let's take a look at some examples of punk rock and hardcore here, because the first thing I bring up is the Sex Pistols. There's a misconception with punk music, especially when we look at a song like God Saves the Queen, where, you know, the Queen's fascist regime, right? I mean, how could that mean anything but a negative, or saying wanting chaos and disorder? And that's when, I mean, that was my interpretation of it until I read this quote from Johnny Rotten.
You don't write God Save the Queen because you hate the English race. You write a song like that because you love them and you're fed up with them being mistreated.
Yeah, absolutely. You can criticize something while still loving it, while still having a deep enjoyment for it. You want it to be better. You think you have an idea of how things could change and be better. And a loving criticism is loving at its heart.
But you know, the problem with punk rock, I think, wasn't so much the message, but rather the visual that got attached to it.
The visual and the tone, yeah.
And some people blame Sid Vicious for that because he comes in with the look and the hair drenched in blood in some cases. He's a drug addict. And, you know, that visual does not help their case. And so that then gets attributed to the message, which then, you know, it spirals into a delegitimization of a movement, which is unfortunate because that quote from Johnny Rotten sounds incredibly populist, but it can't go anywhere if the harsh negatives overweigh the benefits, right?
Yeah, the song's already speaking for itself in the wrong way to some degree. Yeah,
exactly right. Now I want to switch focus and look at the Dead Kennedys.
There's so many songs to bring up. You have some here. I'll let you address what you want to address, and I want to bring a little tangential thing here.
Great. I don't have too much because I appreciated California Uber Alice and Holiday in Cambodia as some of the most fun songs to play in Rock Band. I know that sounds sacrilegious.
Right.
But that is my introduction to them, essentially.
Yeah.
Mike, what do you want to say about them?
I wanted to bring up the song Kill the Poor, which is one of my favorite Dead Kennedy songs. And this isn't an original thought. It's a piece of satire and the not original thought. It's the Dead Kennedys song version of A Modest Proposal. We're not actually talking about eating babies. We're not actually talking about killing the poor. It's a satirical take on society. That's political.
The same kind of satire that fills a song like Holiday in Cambodia.
Right.
Right? Where it's like, you're so comfortable in your privileged world. Go spend a weekend in Cambodia.
Sure. It's just that scathing satire that I appreciate punk rock for.
Let's talk about our next group, because I feel like them in combination with Dead Kennedys, it'll bring up that idea of how effective is the message, because Rage Against the Machine is the band I want to bring up at this point.
I think they're a great choice because maybe for our age in particular, this is one of the first rock bands that I was beginning to learn about in middle school, I guess.
Yes, we should mention that this, we're shifting from 70s to 80s. We are now dead center 1990s.
Right. And this was music can have a political message to it. I don't know what some of these things they're talking about are. We didn't have Wikipedia at the time, but you would ask your parents, you would ask a friend, what are some of these things they're talking about?
My question comes with the delegitimizing of the message. I said this with punk rock, where the visual comes in of Sid Vicious and throws the message out the window because now I'm attributing violent activity or very unconventional fashion sense with a music that's sharing a message that's quite universal. When we look at Rage Against the Machine and Dead Kennedys, a song like Bulls on Parade, it's genius in how powerful that song is with the way that the drums are as heavy and as well timed as they are with Tom Morello's powerful guitar. Another song like Sleep Now in the Fire kind of does that as well. I love the music to it. I had no idea until I was researching for this episode what Bulls on Parade was about.
Some of the stuff was actually about, yeah. See, I think that maybe that's the difference is I was discovering alternative rock music and how we were talking about early on in our introductions, how you've always floated from style to style. I've always gone whole hog on a genre for a while and learned everything there was to learn, and then something would distract me 3 years later and I'd move on to whatever related subgenre. So I did all my Rage Against the Machine research when I was in middle school. So I don't remember all the songs anymore. I still love that. I want to throw out one of my favorite quotes from Down Rodeo. These people ain't seen a brown-skinned man since their grandparents bought one. When I was in middle school, that line just cut me.
I hate to say that it just never entered my radar.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I'm listening to, and I guess this kind of also enters the question of what kind of listener are you? Because for me at that time, I was not a lyric person. I was a music person. And the music caught me more than anything else. And at some point, there is a need to look further into the music you're listening to and research a little bit about it, just in terms of, if you really enjoy something, you're not just going to go, okay, that was nice. You're going to go and look into it.
Yeah, you start learning more. And that's the thing is I wouldn't consider myself a lyrical person. I always want to be and I aspire to be, and I never quite hit that. And it always weirds me out when my wife learns lyrics faster than I do. So I'm like, I've listened to this album for 10 years longer than you. How'd you learn this faster than me? How do I not know the lyrics yet? So like I aspire to it, but I've never quite hit it. And there was something about those songs that just got me at that time. I don't know if it was the right age, right song, right delivery.
So they're effective in a way because they bring awareness to an issue that you otherwise would never have heard had they not done the song.
Right.
I mean, that cannot be overstated. But at the same time, if you're a popular artist, you're not always going to be effective with your message if the music, I hate to say it, is almost too good, right?
Yeah.
If it's too attractive or doesn't push enough buttons, or if it's rebellious in music that draws a lot of adoration, but the message gets overwhelmed in, wanting to hear Tom Morello do a nice solo.
Sure, yeah.
And I actually feel like that's part of what leads to the downfall of the message is, I don't want to say Tom Morello, but I want to say the theatrics.
Yeah, the production, the theatrics,
But if it wasn't there, it wouldn't have entered the pop sphere at the same time. I cannot think of Bulls on Parade without the solo, or Sleep Now in the Fire without its fiery chorus. I can't picture those songs without that, but at the same time, that's taking away from what it could be saying.
I'd say it enhances them in some ways. I guess it depends on where you are in your life at the time and how you're approaching the album.
It also comes in with age, right? Because in my 30s anyway, I'm paying a lot more attention to lyrics than I ever have been.
Sure.
Maybe it took time. Maybe some people get to it faster than others. Maybe the best way to say it is just as long as you get popular in some way, you're going to get your message out there. You take the risk of delegitimizing it with
is it worth it to delegitimize the message to some degree? I don't know if that's the right word, but yeah.
Now there's also, we can't overlook Riot Girl music coming out of the Northwest in the 1990s because this was a very venerable movement as well. Bands like Bikini Kill were absolutely trailblazers in this with songs like Rebel Girl. Still stayed underground. Kathleen Hanna is going to show up again later as well because she is a very vocal part of that group. The way that it evolves, however, is fascinating to me because whether it directly correlates or not, Riot Girl of the 1990s jump a couple decades and here comes Pussy Riot out of Russia and their hyper political music and they're taking punk rock, you could say, back to its basics in a way.
Yeah, and local punk rock to a global scale in this case too.
Now, if you've never heard of Pussy Riot, they are a collective of Russian anti-Putin activists who would commit illegal acts to gain notoriety for their message, essentially.
Again, more with the personal politics, the quote-unquote illegal acts.
Yeah,
depending
right.
on the regime at the time.
Exactly. They got arrested for performing in a church. Of course, they got arrested, thrown in jail. Gives them a tremendous amount of press. All the attention they get only helps them.
Yeah.
Their music is really nothing to shake a stick at.
Yeah.
I mean, they are very basic.
But you need something in a regime like that. And this is so tough because you're essentially resigning yourself to, well, I'm going to be a martyr at some point. But at the same time, is there some amount of protection for they've gotten so much notoriety, were they to silently be removed, that would speak volumes in its absence. So there's power in there.
With Pussy Riot, I feel like the message overtook the music.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember.
Sure. Yeah, I couldn't tell you a single song. Yeah.
I can't.
I know the news story. That's about it.
I know the news story. I remember them performing in front of the Olympic logo in Sochi. And I mean, the press that they got, they showed up on the Colbert Report of all things.
Right.
In this really, and what's scary, what should be scary to the Russian government is that they came off as charismatic in that interview. Because that really undermines the kind of impression that this government would want to put on them. Right. They would want to delegitimize their message as much as humanly possible. Pussy Riot's doing the exact opposite, but actually coming across as being very sympathetic.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a scary line there. So when we look at punk rock and how the music can be too enjoyable, that it delegitimizes the message. Here, it's a bit different. It's the opposite. You could say that they were pretty effective in getting their message across about how the regime in Russia is not working towards their people's best interest, let's put it that way. But what I do feel is interesting about them is what they've done since. They actually most recently ran a successful Kickstarter campaign in August of 2017 to produce an immersive theatrical experience. Basically, what happens is you live Pussy Riot's experience in a Russian prison. This got successfully funded.
That's crazy.
It is crazy. We're going to kind of jump back into the 1980s for this. Yeah. But
I know we're all throughout time, and just the way the genres overlap and weave into each other here. We're back to the 80s.
When we talk about rapper hip hop, how can you not mention Grandmaster Flash and the message?
You have to. It's weird that I want someone to do some kind of psychological analysis on me. The songs I bring up, like Kill the Poor, and the message, another one of my favorites, talking about the distribution of wealth in our country. These are the songs that seem to speak to me the most.
It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under. It's like a jungle sometimes. It makes me wonder how I keep from going under.
I'll bring it up again where I was much more interested in the music in this case, or the flow of the rhymes.
I mean, it's such a perfectly produced song. It's a clean lyrical style. It's just, I don't even know how to go about describing it. I would need to sit back and listen to the song 10 times in a row to even begin to articulate what I love about it.
And, you know, I don't want to overlook the lyrics at all. In fact, if you go to Genius and you look up the lyrics to the song, I mean, it's
scathing.
It's scathing. It really makes you rethink what New York City was like in the 80s from a perspective you probably never seen.
Yeah, we can't imagine that. We only really know, and we got a little bit of the pre-Giuliani in our lives, I guess. I like still being able to have this historical record of it.
You have to look at it comparatively to say, this is what it was like at that point in time in that place. Mm-hmm. Has it gotten any better?
Has it gotten any better, and can we not repeat history, please?
I kind of think of hip hop and rap as being very similar to what rock and roll was in the 50s, where it was this rebellious, it grew up from the belly of New York youth and just sort of expanded into, now a global empire at this point.
Yeah.
But it had its roots in being rebellion music, because you beat people enough into submission, they're going to just create their own culture and basically, again, subversion, if you will, of the mainstream, because
that's how you take the power back.
There are plenty more examples. I mean, Public Enemy, even with the comical element of Flavor Flav,
right,
if you will.
Yeah.
Chuck D is just such a massively effective communicator. And songs like Fight the Power,
yep,
or even with Flavor Flav, 911 is a Joke is a terrific song and very effective. It actually got me to pay attention to the lyrics and like, why is 911 a joke?
They got me to pay attention to rap music when I was probably far too young to appreciate what these songs are about. And this is my little fun side story is I was discovering rap music, and Yo MTV Raps is really big. And I bought all the collectible card series for Yo MTV Raps, and I have a complete collection somewhere in the room behind you over there. So all the rap artists of the day I know a little bit too much about for how old I was. But they were getting the attention of a young white boy like me with their message, because it was that important. It was getting out there enough through the way that they were communicating that message.
Gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Hey. Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power. Fight the power. Fight the power. Fight the power.
So again, subversion, because they have a message. They're getting popular. They get money. In a capitalist society especially, if you've got a message, it matters more that you make money, because if you can make money, your message will definitely go with it. I want to bring it into a modern example where rap and hip hop get into very effective protest music, and I want to bring it to Kendrick Lamar. I want to look at the song All Right from To Pimp a Butterfly. It effectively has taken over the Black Lives Matter movement.
Be all right. We gon' be all right. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be all right. We gon' be all right. Huh? We gon' be all right. 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 We gon' be all right.
It gives me the idea that the reason why it's so effective, let's go back to We Shall Overcome. 3 words, very simple song structure, very easy to repeat, but the key to it is optimism. And I think that when you look at Fight the Power, the message, Holiday in Cambodia, I'm not necessarily saying anything, even Born in the USA, I'm not really saying anything that is an initiative.
Okay.
And so when you say We Shall Overcome, that's a very powerful message, because
A mantra to live by.
Right.
I see where you're going there, yeah.
it's saying, no matter what you do, we're going to get over this, right? We gon' be all right is an easy, optimistic view that is very easy to say, very easy to chant, but it actually accomplishes something by saying that.
Yeah, but it's also a challenge. It's saying no matter what you do, we're going to get through it.
Right. I think that's why it's so effective, especially in 2016 with the climate of the election. I mean, there was a very strange mix of optimism and warning.
Dread.
Dread. Definitely. I want to transition from something that's very effective to something that kind of, I don't want to say it's ineffective, but maybe worked against itself. And it's unfortunate that I have to bring up Kathleen Hanna from Bikini Kill. She had other groups along her career, and La Tigra is one of them. I actually recommended La Tigra in a previous version of Low Fidelity. They put out a song during the 2016 election called I'm With Her. Let's just spend a couple of seconds listening to this.
She doesn't bake cookies, doesn't play much golf, and the whole world is watching her persistent cough. Has the wicked witch a glass of water? Careful not to spill it, you might melt the Donald. She's already done the math, and she's ready with a plan, and she's always got to work twice as hard as every man. Bye-bye, 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 bye-bye. Trump has got to go. I'm with her to the top. She's with us. We won't stop.
Wow. You assume it's a parody.
A bad kind of subversion
Yeah.
where it sort of undermines itself just based on the quality of the music.
Okay, so what's bad about it? What makes it sound like it's a parody of itself rather than being in earnest? Is it the cheap instrumental? Is it the over direct lyrical content?
If I didn't know anything about Hillary Clinton, then this song may have had a chance to influence an opinion.
Yeah, and you can see how even if you were in support of that campaign, diluting the meaning of the song from the artist's perspective, I can see how that would be a personal offense in some way. Better to try and fail than to not try at all.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to take that stance on this. Now let's bring up the...
T-Swift!
Yeah, so Taylor Swift. She originally just has never given an opinion on her political stance. And so she's been getting a lot of heat, especially after the election, because she posted a pic online on her Twitter showing that she, or Instagram, whatever it was, that she was online to vote. And then she had a lawsuit with this guy who touched her inappropriately, and she won the lawsuit. So that's her kind of getting political in that sense, but still no tweets.
Hold on. I want to push back against that. Getting political, a lawsuit against someone for such a heinous act, that is not getting political.
I'm so glad you said that, because essentially everything I was reading leading up to this was saying she finally got political because she exercised her own right to be treated as a human being.
Yeah.
To me, that doesn't read as political either.
Okay, so we agree here.
No, we do agree on this. I found it kind of weird that it was being bent that way, but I think it's because they're trying to reach and get some kind of a political attachment.
Well, there's a lot of weird shit going on here. I mean, there's the whole sexist bent of it as well. But in a broad sense, I'm really conflicted on this because I'm nowhere near this. But again, I've been doing this site for 20 years. I have people who have followed me for a long time. People want to know more about the people that they listen to, that they read, that they enjoy, that they look up to. I would never place myself anywhere near someone like Taylor Swift. But people want to know things about you. And you have to have a little bit of a separation because you want to be your own individual. You don't want to overshare for a variety of reasons. Basic privacy, like I just want to have my own separate life independent of the artistic endeavor that I have. You also want to separate it for the creeps out there. There's a lot to think about in that regard. So I can really empathize with the, look, I'm just focusing on my music. This is what I do. For all intents and purposes, for you as a consumer, this is who I am. Let's separate that. At the same time, when you get to that level, whether it's through sheer determination and effort or lucky coincidence, right place, right time, music blows up in some capacity and suddenly you're a massive artist, you take on new responsibilities that are unique to you. You have to take advantage of. You have to be responsible for those responsibilities.
So I want to talk about strategy a little bit. Now, this is going to be theory or hypothesis, if you will.
Okay.
Where let's not forget what Taylor Swift's fan base consisted of as she was becoming popular.
Go back. She was a country singer.
Yes.
That very quickly and cleverly and effectively transitioned over into the pop mainstream.
So she's very well aware of the audience that she comes from.
Yep.
Has a very big fan base.
Still loyal.
That's her culture. That's where she comes from. And so what happens if she gets political, right? Because now she's popular, which means that she's got all sorts of opinions behind the people that are considered fans of hers. You could see her as an influential figure because she has all of these young people that could be very concrete in a direction if she sways them in that way. So I get the idea of people who say she should take a stance because she could be very useful on either side of the, I want to just real quick say, mini rant, that for people who say, oh, we could use her because she would be very powerful for our message, do you not get the sense that if it was powerful for your message, it would be powerful for the opposite message as well?
Right, it could be used against you.
Like if you're going to fight against free speech for one group, do you not see that backfiring on your own group later on?
The other thing, and I talk about this quite often more than I care to, is people don't understand what free speach actually means. Free speech does not mean free from being criticized for the words that you just said. This is really tough because, like you're saying, we were talking about this earlier in the episode. I'm going to make a criticism of the fan now rather than the artist. I think that if someone comes out and has a stance that you don't agree with and that changes your opinion on the music, I question whether or not you were a fan of that music to begin with. And this is something I want to bring up. And I know it didn't fit into a discussion you and I had on the Reboot introduction, but I want to make sure that it gets recorded here because I think it's relevant here. It's an artist over in Japan who does the soundtrack for a series of video games called Dragon Quest. His name is Koichi Sugiyama. He's a wonderfully talented person. He's also a terrible human being. He is one of these old Japanese fogies that refuses to acknowledge the Nanking Massacre. He took out a full-page article with some of his old cronies in the newspaper saying that this never happened. I am extremely conflicted every time I play it. Like, I'm actually getting angry as I talk about it. I am so conflicted every time I play a Dragon Quest video game. And more so than that, when I put on the symphonic arrangement albums that I know he had a heavy hand in, I'm like, this is absolutely beautiful music. You are a monster of a human being. This gets back to that question of separating the artist from the message,
right,
from the persona. It's really tough. And so to take it all back around again, if she were to come out, let's just say, super heavy anti-Trump, let's assume the generic Southern hick, old fan, super Trump supporter, but loved T Swift, now no longer loves T Swift. Were they ever a fan in the first place? I totally get that when I reflect on my consumption of Sugiyama music. That's a tough position for all sides here. I don't envy any position. But then there are also times, and this gets a little bit later into what you had on the notes here, but I listen to a lot of bands on the Tooth and Nail record label who are not super religious, but there's a religious background to that record label. And there's a lot of music that I listen to. I have some pretty, I don't know if I want to call them radical thoughts on religion in modern society. So it's weird it's weird to me to think about me listening to music that has a religious message behind it, but still enjoying the music and the lyrics. So I don't know where I'm going with any of those different avenues of the discussion, but I can totally see you're at this level, you have a responsibility now. What is your stance?
Well, but there's a couple of different factors at play in terms of what is the focus, because with Taylor Swift, I'm going to speculate that a lot of her fans are interested in her lyrics and not so much her music.
Sure, because I mean, let's be honest, a lot of that is super simple. It's about relationships.
But it's what helps connect her with her audience, right? So it's the lyrics that do it. The music helps with that, but really the lyrics are what she focuses on. She's a popular artist, therefore her lyrics are scrutinized for that reason.
Yes.
In that regard, she's going to be looked at very heavily as an influencer because what she says matters more than how she says it.
I get it, because her lyrics are being scrutinized more so than some other artists. Therefore, the words that she says, which are like lyrics, are the words that she says.
So if we look at the Sugiyama example, in his case, he doesn't necessarily write lyrics.
Right. It's not the word. It's just sweeping orchestral music. Right. So I get to have that separation of, I don't have to hear his voice in my head. He's not the scenario writer in the games. He's not the character designer in the games. So there is that barrier that I can put up for myself.
Right. And you could say the same thing with like a classical composer, for an example, Wagner, where, yes, I'm supposed to be tainted by that, but is it effective? Do I cringe when I hear Ride of the Valkyries? Not so much.
That's tough. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a tough call. And I feel like it's a wonderful example when we look at Taylor Swift, because, yes, we can immediately identify what her fans would go through if she were to say, no, I was with Hillary, I voted Hillary.
Your goal of the podcast is to empathize with people, and I'm hoping that I can show my side of that. I can understand what they would go through, even if I would be, we're just projecting here, even if I would be on the exact opposite side of them, condemning all of their viewpoints. I can see the mental gymnastics and mental hardships that they would experience. You were talking about the having no opinion on things. Let's jump ahead to having too many opinions and too much activism. Bono, I can't even tell you what it is about him anymore that puts me off, but I just know that he drives me nuts.
I am so glad you bring that up. A great transition into the musician as activist.
Yes.
And in the case of Bono, in exposing the notes a little bit, I put him last because it's an example of doing too much, or what that means to be in activism. But at the same time, doing it at a time where activism is not a fashionable stance to take. Because I would argue that in the 90s and, slightly in the 2000s, even though there was a lot of activism against George W. Bush, but when you look at the success of the United States in the 90s with Clinton as president, and here goes Bono going to Africa and doing this, here goes Sting to do the rainforest.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like, well, this is the perfect opportunity to bring light to these issues that we otherwise would have been distracted from for our own internal nonsense going on.
So what a horrible thing to put on human nature, to say that when things are good for us, we care less about what's happening bad elsewhere.
Right.
Whereas if things are bad for us, we start to be able to empathize with those who don't have it as good, right?
So tell me, why does Bono drive me nuts if I can't articulate it?
Okay, so I can tell you why. Because when I look at the things that Bono has done, I cannot pinpoint a singular thing on him that he does. For example, if I go to Sting, now
Rainforest.
Exactly.
That's his thing.
As a marketing strategy, he cares about the rainforest. That's it. He hasn't done anything for kids in Somalia. He hasn't done anything.
Does Bono care too much and that's why we hate him? What's going on here?
Could you not say the same thing about movie actors and actresses who do the same thing? And I want to bring up a quote that Paul Theroux, he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times in 2005. He said this about Bono. Oh, I should mention as well, he also lived in Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer, right? So a little bit of credence behind what he's saying. This is what he said about Bono. The impression that Africa is fatally troubled and can be saved only by outside help, not to mention celebrities and charity concerts, is a destructive and misleading conceit.
Okay, so I know what drives me nuts is he thinks he's white savior coming in and he's the only one who can do it.
But he's never saying that. He's just acting.
I know.
So
I know.
He's actually doing something. Like this.
We all have these bands that we irrationally hate. For me, U2 is one of, I love Mysterious Ways. And I hate that I love that song so much because I otherwise can't stand Bono and by extension U2. And I can't articulate why that is.
We have a number of examples where if someone has one stance on an issue, not one stance, rather, if they have a stance on one issue,
They have a shtick
that's easier to swallow than someone who has multiple shticks. I want to bring up some examples of people who are effective.
Okay.
And again, coincidentally enough, you can sort of attribute them to one particular cause, and that's maybe why they have such a good opinion of, why people have such a good opinion of them and what they focus on. Certainly John Cougar Mellencamp, Willie Nelson, and Neil Young doing Farm Aid. Neil Young teeters that line where he's done multiple things before. He was railing against the National Guard and the Kent State thing with Ohio. He wrote that song. That was decades ago, however. If you were to attribute him to a social stance or a political stance now, it would be about farmers because of Farm Aid.
Yep.
The same thing you can say about Willie Nelson and John Cougar Mellencamp. That is one example. When I think of John Lennon and the bed-in with Yoko Ono, where they decide, hey, since our marriage is going to be this huge newsworthy event, let's have a honeymoon in a bed in a hotel and invite the press, or everyone for that matter. Let's just invite everyone. And it was for peace,
Right.
Is it because world peace is such a nowadays crazy thought that,
Right.
that's why...
That's so quaint to think about.
Right, quaint. I think of that and I look at it like, this is kind of ridiculous, but I've heard of it.
But it wasn't just philanthropy. It was performance art. I mean, we know that through and through.
Why waste the effort of the press in that case? But
yeah, but if that's who you are and that's the kind of thing you're going to do, and you can also get a message out at the same time, like maybe it's a win-win. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. One last example, Chris Novoselic of Nirvana.
Yep.
He has done a number of things in regards to politics and how politics works in the United States. Though first he was part of JAMPAC, which is the Joint Artists and Music Promotions Political Action Committee. They fought censorship and protected First Amendment rights for music.
We've seen every art form come under fire and attempt to be censored and attempt to be shut down. It's important that artists are able to say what they need to say.
And we glorify free speech so much in the social media days that we're seeing actual free speech that does need to be protected.
Right.
Apart from someone's...
Right. Free speech, and you removed my forum post. That's not free speech. Free speech is the government told me I'm not allowed to sell my album anymore.
Bingo. So that certainly had a lot of success, and something that he's doing now is he's advocating for a new way of representation, how representation works in the United States. Far be it for me to explain how it works, but it's called fairvote.org. That's what he's a part of now. So we go into really getting involved in politics, and that is musicians who become politicians.
Yeah.
But some examples of that.
Yeah.
Sonny Bono has to be number one.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, the most popular of anyone who's gotten into politics, highly conservative views, did very well, right? So that charisma, which you could say kind of helped with being in pop music and,
sure,
being part of Sonny and Cher, he brings that charisma into the Senate and gets a lot done just based on that. Look, if you think of politics as a game, yes, charisma is going to probably get you far. So
it's one of your most effective tools, for sure.
Probably is. So certainly one example. Another one that I found really interesting was this guy, John Hall. He was the guitarist for this band Orleans. And if you don't know Orleans, you've probably heard the song Still the One. I thought that was interesting that someone like that, I never heard of his election or anything, but apparently he's a progressive Democrat who is a representative of New York's 19th district. So there's a success story for you. Another one that you could say I personally have a lot of familiarity with is John Fishman, the drummer of the band Phish. He won a position this year, 2017, as a member of the City Council of Lincolnville, Maine, a very small community, but someone getting involved in politics who sits on the council when he's not touring. Let's wrap this all up. I call this morals of the story. I just want to say first, kind of going back to the Taylor Swift example here, that my thought is if artists have to balance a wide audience with a firm position on a polarizing issue, is it better to say nothing to maintain your audience?
I would argue no.
I say kind of yeah, just because in the case of Taylor Swift, I haven't seen that many, speculative sense here, I haven't seen that many people saying, I'm not going to listen to her anymore because she's not taking an issue.
Yeah, but what do you care about the loyalty of her fan base? I would would expect you to care more about an issue than of some artist's fan base.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because I heard a very interesting discussion as I was researching this. The argument that I heard that affected me the most was that if you're going to put emphasis on the person and not on the issue, you are successfully delegitimizing the issue.
Okay.
You're focusing more on the vehicle on which a viewpoint is coming from, not on the issue itself. You are therefore just basically saying the issue doesn't matter unless a particular person has something to say about it.
Yeah, it gets back to, well, we need you for our team, so come out with it.
I could not agree more with that sentiment. I mean, that makes more sense to me.
I acknowledge all that and still disagree on a principle level.
I enjoy the fact that that is such a contentious idea.
Sure.
So another idea, if you're a fan of a popular band with political content, it can't really be assumed that you then follow their ideology.
Right. And this is a really tough one because to some degree, well, you're listening to it and you're accepting it and maybe you're presumably spending your money on it in support of it. To some degree, that is an implicit support of that message. But then I think about myself listening to Me Without You specifically, and it's like, I don't necessarily agree with the religious bent to their music, but there's something else in there that I appreciate and enjoy.
You have the example of Me Without You. I've got the example of Rage Against the Machine, where it's like, I think the songs are really energetic, and if I want to be angry about something, this is the soundtrack to that. I mean, it's so effective, but
those specific issues,
I don't know anything more about the plight of Native Americans. I don't know more about the military-industrial complex. Apparently, those are in the songs. To this day, I don't see that message because that's not what I'm focusing on.
Gotcha.
So it's right. It depends on the band, but it would be unfair to say that because I listen to them, I agree with their views.
Yes and no. Like I said, your support of them is therefore implicit support of their ideology and message and purpose.
All right. So another point, artists can be called out as an armchair activist just as easily as anyone else can on social media.
Yeah. But again, if you're in a position of power and authority, you have more responsibilities than someone else.
If you're in a position of power with a social media account, that's a different topic all to itself. No, we won't even go there right now.
Social media will have to be another discussion topic at some point in the future.
All right. What about this, Mike? So simple optimism makes the best movement anthems.
The way that you end that by talking about making the best anthems, I agree with.
What part do you disagree with?
If you take away anthems about simple optimism being the most effective message, I don't necessarily agree with.
I'm with her.
There's a lot to go into there, but if you're looking to have an effective anthem, an optimistic message is probably the best way to do it. You keep asking me to agree with you, and I keep disagreeing with you.
No, but that's the best.
So what is your last point?
My last point is it is better for music to help guide a cause, but it will rarely ever be the single cause for change.
I agree with you there.
All right, perfect. We finally have what we agree on. But it certainly shows in the examples we talked about.
Yeah.
You're bringing awareness, but that awareness does not then lead to change in policy. That's crazy to think that a song could do that.
Yeah, but I wonder, maybe we're just not thinking of the right examples. I'd love to hear, this is where I want the feedback. I want to hear other people of, no, this song, like maybe just locally really helped drive this message home and contributed to change on a national level, on a global level. I don't know. I mean, Michael Jackson certainly tried with some of his songs, but I don't think that the song alone can drive that change.
Now, I can't remember where I heard this, but there was a documentary that I watched about the 1960s. Now, granted, I mean, let's take this with a grain of salt. It was probably something on VH1. It was specifically said in this particular documentary that there was an idealism that music could actually change the world, and it was deeply depressing that it didn't.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we were still in Vietnam despite all of these protest songs. There was a massive amount of protest songs. We're even going to address it in the album we're going to review on our next episode.
That makes me think about you were talking about this earlier. There was protest against George Bush. I remember the 2 Rock Against Bush albums. There's no Rock Against Trump album yet. And is it just that, well, we've learned this doesn't work? Maybe that's the moral of the story.
Oof. Yikes.
That's depressing.
That is
Sorry,
depressing.
your optimism's out the window.
It is, but what we're going to do is we're going to bring back that optimism by talking about some wonderful music on our next episode of Low Fidelity. Isn't that right, Mike?
I like it. So that's our discussion of artists in politics. We're always interested. Again, we want to hear what you have to say about this. Did we miss some giant example that you think is critical to the point? Let us know. So join the conversation on our subreddit or send us your take on the topic, feedback@lowfidelity.com. lo-fidelity.info.
On the next episode of Low Fidelity, we are going to analyze and review John Prine's 1971 self-titled album. Until then, thank you for listening to this episode, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks.